Welcome to your first design challenge. Now that you've learned how to structure a project from scratch, how to design everything consistently and responsively, it's time to put everything you've learned into practice by designing a user interface on your own. Yes, you heard me right. You need to start designing a page from scratch by yourself, and you also need to make it responsive. So here is your design challenge. For our Polio CRM project, we didn't design a signing or sign up page, right? So I want you to design a sign-in page from scratch. I already designed it, and I want you to design the exact same sign-in page because I want you to make sure that everything is structured properly. So here is the sign-in page that I designed. As you can see here, we have a card, we have the Polio logo, then we have this headline, these two social login buttons, then we have this small text layer. Here we have two text fields, we have this large button, and finally we have this bottom container. So I want you to design this page, and I want you to apply everything you've learned so far to this task, from spacing system to layout grid to color usage, everything. And also make sure to make it responsive. You need to design it for 4 different breakpoints. The desktop breakpoint, which is this one, the tablet breakpoint, which is this one, the mobile breakpoint, which is this one, and finally the large desktop breakpoint. And if you can, create a breakpoint prototype as well, like what you see here. So basically we need to have 4 different breakpoints, and the layout should change accordingly, just like that. If you're wondering where you can get these logos from, you can look for them on Google, but I already prepared them for you. Just download the assets folder for this section, and inside you'll find these 2 logos, the Apple's logo and the Google's logo. All right, so start designing this sign-in page, and in the next lesson we'll do it together. I'll see you there. Welcome to your second design challenge. While we were designing the Polio landing page, I'm sure many of you have wondered how I designed this screenshot, this dashboard. Well, your next challenge is to start designing this table within this dashboard. You don't need to design the whole dashboard. You can if you want, but I want you to design a responsive table, this all transactions table with all these elements. So here, if I go to the second challenge, as you can see, I designed this table and it's fully responsive. Obviously, I've hidden all the layers, so you don't know how I structured it. But basically, you should design a fully responsive table just like this with different columns, and you should be able to add more columns to it later on if you need to. Let me give you a hint for this challenge. There are some elements that can be componentized before you start designing this table, since you already know what kind of elements you should design. So think of those elements in advance and start turning them into components before you even start designing the table. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome to your next design challenge. As for your next challenge, I want you to design a responsive sidebar layout. What does it mean? Well, nowadays most web apps use a sidebar menu on the left or on the right side, right? And it's quite a common design pattern, but many designers don't know how to make a responsive sidebar layout in Figma. So I want you to design this responsive dashboard layout. You don't need to design the sidebar itself. I just want you to make it responsive like what I have here. So basically you need to have a fixed size sidebar on the left, and on the right, you need to place your table, the table you designed in the previous lesson. And this whole frame should be responsive, just like this. As you can see, the sidebar is intact. However, the table is responsive. So please go ahead and start designing this layout, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome back. Have you solved the challenge? Have you designed the sign-in page? I'm pretty sure you could handle everything by yourself, but if you faced some issues or you didn't know how to structure this page properly, don't worry, we are gonna do it together right now. First of all, as usual, I'm gonna create a desktop frame. I'm gonna hit A on my keyboard, and from here, let's add a desktop frame, and I'm gonna rename it to signin/desktop. This is gonna be our desktop breakpoint. And I'm gonna change the background of this sign-in page. I'm gonna add a light gray to it. So later when we put a white card on it, we get some separation between the foreground and the background. So that's why I'm gonna darken the background a little bit. So from here, I'm going to change the color, the fill to gray 50. Don't make it too dark, by the way. And as you know, the first thing we need to do is add our layout grid to this frame. So from here, I'm going to add a desktop layout grid, just like this. And what else do we need? Well, for our landing page, we usually created a section first, and then inside that section, we put a container. For this page, it's a little bit different. We are not going to create the section at the moment for this desktop breakpoint. Instead, we are going to create a container, okay? So I'm going to hit A on my keyboard, and I'm going to draw a frame just like this, and I'm going to add auto layout to it, hit Shift and A, and let's call it container. And the reason we didn't create a section and put our container inside is because this container should have a fixed width for this sign-in page. So actually, I don't want this container to take up the whole available width within this layout grid. So it shouldn't take up 12 different columns. Instead, I want it to take up 6 columns right in the middle. So here, I'm going to align it just like this, okay? And I'm going to make sure that it takes up precisely 6 columns. So if we set the width to 554, you'll see that it takes up 6 columns, but we need to align it to the center, just like that. All right, now I'm gonna hide my layout grid. We don't need it anymore. And I'm gonna set these values for the auto layout settings. First, let's get rid of this horizontal spacing. We will adjust it later. And also I'm gonna get rid of the padding, both of them. Later we will change it. Now I'm gonna add a fill to it. It's gonna be white, so I'm gonna choose base white from our color palettes. And this is gonna be our card container. Now we can start adding elements inside, and then we will adjust the spacing. So what do we need? Well, first here right at the top, we need to have the logo, the polio logo, right? So I'm gonna go to my workspace here, and from here, I'm just gonna select one of these logos from these breakpoints. I'm gonna copy it and just paste it right here. So here is our logo. And as soon as I paste it here, our container tries to hug this logo. That's because we set the vertical resizing option to hug. It should be hug content, but not now, because it's gonna make our life so much harder. So I'm gonna set it to fixed and just increase its height, just like this for now. Now I'm gonna select the logo and I'm gonna scale it up a little bit. Since we have so much space here, we can afford to take up more space. So I'm gonna select the logo, hit K to select the scale tool, and I'm just gonna change the height to 72, like this. All right, looks good. Now I'm gonna select the container and just align everything to the center, like this. Okay, cool. All right, now underneath this logo, we need to have this sign-in label. So I'm gonna create a text layer. I'm gonna hit T on my keyboard to create a text layer. And here I'm gonna type sign in, and I'm gonna change its text style to display XS bold. I'm gonna change it to display XS bold, like this. And also, it should be placed right under our logo. Therefore, I'm gonna select these two, the logo and this sign-in label, and put them inside an auto layout frame. I'm gonna hit Shift and A, and I'm gonna call this frame header. Obviously, the direction should be changed to vertical, and we need to put the logo above this label. So I'm gonna select it, and using the arrow keys on my keyboard, I'm gonna move it up, just like that. Now I'm gonna select this header frame, and I'm gonna align them to the center, and we can specify the spacing between these two items. So for these two items, I'm gonna set the spacing to 24 since they are somehow related. And now the top part is almost ready. We just need to change the color of this text to gray 900, just like that. Perfect. Now it's time to design these two social login buttons, the sign in with Google and sign in with Apple buttons. For that, I'm just going to create a text layer and just type sign in with Google, like that. But it's way too big. I'm going to change its text style to text medium, this one, semi-bold, like this. And now you know what to do. We just need to put it inside a container. So we can just simply add auto layout to it, hit Shift and A, like this. And now it's placed inside an auto layout frame. Let's rename it to button / Google. And now I'm going to add a fill to it. So I'm going to change its color to gray 50, like this. And as for the text color, I'm going to change it to gray 500, this one. But we need to check the contrast ratio between these two colors. So I'm going to select this text and run the contrast plugin here to check the contrast ratio. And as you can see, it passed all these tests. All right, what else do we need? We need the Google logo, right? So from the assets folder, I'm going to drag and drop it inside this button frame. Make sure to place it inside this frame, just like that. And the size is going to be 24 by 24 pixels. Now we can select this button frame and just adjust these values. Well, as for the vertical padding, I'm going to set it to 12. And as for the horizontal padding, to be honest, this value doesn't matter because we are going to change its resizing option to fill container later. So in this case, this value really doesn't matter. And the last thing I'm going to do is make it rounded. So I'm going to select this button and just increase the corner radius to 12. And just like this, our sign in with Google button is ready. Now we need to put it below these items. So I'm going to select the container and just change the direction to vertical like that. And now I'm going to select this button and using the arrow keys on my keyboard, I'm going to move it down. Just like this, looks good. But here, as you can see, we don't have any space between this top frame and this bottom frame. To fix that, we just need to select our container frame, which is the parent frame for these two child frames, and we just need to increase the spacing between items. I'm going to set this value to 32. Remember, for these two, we set it to 24, but now this button is not that related to this top frame. Therefore, I increased the spacing between these items within our container. Okay. And finally, let's select this button frame and just change its resizing option to fill container because we want it to take up the whole available width within the parent container. All right, good. Now let's align everything to the center and our first button is ready. Now we can simply duplicate it and just change this text to sign in with Apple. And we just need to change this logo as well. So you know what? I'm going to drag and drop this logo here, place it inside this button, and just get rid of the previous logo. Just like that, our two logos are ready. But these two buttons are quite related, right? So we need to put them inside another frame. I'm going to select them both and hit Shift and A and just call it buttons or actions. And now we need to decrease this value. Since they are quite related, we shouldn't use something like 24 or 16. If I set it to 24, you see they are not close enough. So I'm going to set it to 12 like this. And if you remember, for our nav bar here, for these buttons, we also set the spacing between our buttons to 12. So everything is consistent. All right, cool. Our social login buttons are also ready. Now we need this OR label. Let's create a text layer and I'm going to type OR and we just need to change its size and its color. So let's start with its size. Since it's not an important text layer within this page, I'm going to make it smaller. So I'm going to choose text small, this one, medium. And as for the color, I'm going to choose gray 500. We don't want it to grab too much attention, so that's why I'm setting it to gray 500. And now it's time to start designing our text fields. How can we design these text fields? Have you figured it out or not? I'm sure you have. So basically, just like creating a button, we need to create a text layer for this text field placeholder text. Then we need to put it inside an auto layout frame, add a border to it. And finally, we need to add this label and put them inside another frame. As simple as that. So let's start by creating a text layer. I'm going to hit T on my keyboard, create a text layer. And here I'm going to type enter your email like this. Let me just increase our container's height. I'm going to select this text and I'm going to change its color. For this, since it's the placeholder text, I'm going to change its color to gray 500. And now we need to put it inside an auto layout frame to make it responsive. So hit Shift and A to put it inside an auto layout frame and just rename it to text field. Now we need to add a border to it, a stroke. So I'm going to head over to the stroke section and from here, I'm going to add a gray 300 stroke to it. Like this. It shouldn't be that dark since it's just a container. And now to keep the styling of our elements consistent, let's make it rounded as well. And for this property, I'm going to set the value to 12. And now it's time to set the padding here. So as for the vertical padding, I'm going to set it to 12. And the reason I set it to 12 is because I want to make sure that the height of this text field is at least 44 points. And as you can see, when I set it to 12, the height will be set to 44, but it also depends on the text style I use. All right, here I used text small medium. Therefore, here, when I set it to 12, I get this particular height, 44, which is recommended for text fields and medium-sized buttons. All right, cool. What about this one? Well, you might say that just like these buttons, this value doesn't matter because we are going to set the resizing option to fill container. Well, it's not true. And many beginners make this mistake. The reason it's not true is because basically we need to set a maximum width for this text layer. And to set that, we need to set this horizontal padding. So here I'm going to set the horizontal padding to 16. And now while this text field frame is selected, I'm going to set its resizing option to fill container. But we need to do one more thing. We need to select this text. And as you can see, it's set to hog. So if I just change it quickly to something else, look what happens. To something long. You see, it goes outside the boundary of this text field. That's not what I want. Instead, we need to set a maximum width for that. And to do that, you just need to select this text and just change its resizing option to fill container, align it to the left. And now if we go ahead and just change this text, look what happens. You see that? It doesn't go outside the boundary of this text field and it's fully responsive. All right, what else do we need? We need one label for this text field. So I'm going to hit T on my keyboard, create a text layer here, and I'm going to type email. The size looks good. We just need to change its color to gray 900. The label matters a lot. So I'm going to set it to gray 900. And now we need to group these two. We need to put them inside a frame. So I'm going to select them both, the email label and this text field, hit Shift and A, and just rename this to text field wrapper because it wraps these two elements. And now it's time to change the alignment to left. The direction should be vertical. But what about this value? If you set something like 4 or 8, you're right, because these are very related. So we cannot set it to something like 16 or 24. Let me just set it to 24. You see? It doesn't seem related anymore. Therefore, we need to use a small value like 4 or 8. If I set it to 4, it works, but I prefer to have more space between the label and the text field itself. So I'm going to increase it to the next value, which is 8. And just like this, our first text field is ready. It was easy, wasn't it? All right, now we need to duplicate this text field wrapper. Just hit Ctrl D or Command D. Let me just select our container and just change its resizing option to hog content like this. I'm going to change this label to password. And also this text should be changed to enter your password. And we are almost done with the text fields. We just need to put this link, this forgot your password link right here. How can we do that? We want this link to stay on the right side of this container all the time. Yes, you're right. We need to set the spacing mode of our auto layout frame to space between. So here, I'm going to select this label, duplicate it, and I'm going to type forgot your password. I'm going to change its color to gray 500 like this. And now we need to put these two text layers in a frame. So I'm going to select these two, hit Shift and A, and I'm going to rename it to label and link. And we need to change the direction to horizontal. And finally, we need to head over to the advanced settings and set the spacing mode to space between. But as you can see, nothing changed. That's because we didn't change this resizing option from fixed to fill container. This frame is not filling its parent container at the moment. So let's change it to fill container. And just like that, this text is pushed to the side and it always stays on the right side of this parent container. And that's exactly what we needed. All right, great. But here we have a problem. These two text fields are quite related, but it doesn't seem like that because here we have too much space in between. Therefore, we need to select them both, these two text field wrappers, put them inside another frame, hit Shift and A, and I'm going to rename it to text fields. And I'm going to set the spacing between to 24. And our text fields section is also ready. Now we need to move on to the next element, which is this sign in button. Since we already designed these buttons, we can simply select one of them, maybe this button apple. Let me rename it to button apple. I'm gonna copy it. I'm gonna select this text fields frame and paste it here. Hit Ctrl V or Command V. The reason I placed it inside this frame, inside this text fields frame, is because this button, the sign in button, is related to these text fields. Therefore, I wanted to have a 24 pixel spacing between this text field and this button as well to keep everything consistent. Now I'm going to rename this button to button sign in and just get rid of this icon. I'm going to remove it. Let's type sign in here. But since it's an important button, this is the main primary button of this page, we need to make sure that the user sees it clearly. Therefore, we need to use a darker color. So I'm going to change it to gray 900. And to have a better contrast ratio between the foreground and background, I'm going to make this text white. So I'm going to select it and just change it to base white. Just like that, our sign in button is also ready. And now it's time to design the last element here, which is this bottom container. It says don't have an account, join Polio. So let's go ahead and create that. To create that, I'm going to create a text layer somewhere around here and just type don't have an account, join Polio. Now while it's selected, I'm going to change its text style. I'm going to make it a bit smaller. So here, I'm going to change it to text SM semi-bold. Like this. The color is going to be gray 900. And here I'm going to change the color of this join Polio section. I'm going to select these two words and just change the color to gray 500, this one. And now we need to create the container around it, right? So while it's selected, I'm going to hit Shift and A to put it inside an auto layout frame. And let's just rename this frame to registration. Great. Now let's add a border to it, a stroke to it. I'm going to add a gray 300 to it, like this. Let's make it rounded as well. I'm going to set the corner radius to 12. And now it's time to change the size of this frame. Well, I'm not going to change these values because it needs to have a fixed height. And also its width should be adjusted according to its parent width. So we need to select it and change its resizing option to fill container, align everything to the center. And as for the height, we need to set its height to fixed height and just change this value to something like 96. It looks good now. And just like that, all our elements are ready. Now it's time to move this element down. So while it's selected, hit the down arrow key on your keyboard like this. And our container card is ready. However, we don't have any padding around these elements. We don't have any breathing room around them. So let's fix that quickly. I'm going to select this container and I'm going to change its horizontal and vertical padding to 48, just like this. And if you see that nothing changes, don't worry, we need to make some changes to the child elements. So here, as you can see, although we set the padding to 48, these elements are not pushed inside. To fix that, we need to select this buttons frame. And as you can see, its resizing option has been changed to hog. We need to change it to fill container like this and hit enter to select the button elements inside and change the resizing option to fill container. Now, as you can see, they are pushed towards the center. The same thing applies to this text. Let's set it to fill container like that. And also for this text fields frame, I'm going to change it to fill container, hit enter to select the child elements, set everything to fill container. And now I'm going to select these two text field wrappers, hit enter and set everything to fill container. And just like this, now everything looks good in terms of spacing. Now we just need to make this card rounded. So I'm going to select this container and just increase this corner radius value to 20. And now, as you can see, it looks much better. And our card container is ready. However, if I select this desktop frame and I try to resize it, you see that it's not responsive, it's not fluid. How can we fix this issue? To fix this issue, we just need to select our container, align it to the center both horizontally and vertically. And now we need to set its constraints to left and right and center. Okay? So if I just unhide my layout grid now, look what we've got. Now I am going to shrink it. As you can see, we have a fluid layout, just like that. And if I just increase the height, look what happens. It stays right at the center of this page. And that's exactly what we needed. All right, great. So we designed the desktop breakpoint. Now it's time to design other breakpoints. I'm going to set the width to 1440 again, like this. Now let's design the tablet breakpoint. For that, I'm just going to duplicate it. I'm going to rename it to sign in tablet. Let's change its layout grid to tablet. And also we need to change its dimension to 744. For the tablet breakpoint, we want this container to take up the whole available width of its parent frame, which is this sign-in tablet frame, okay? So we don't need to have a fixed width anymore. Instead, we can create a section and put this container inside and make sure that it takes up the whole available width within its parent container. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to select this container, hit Shift and A to put it inside another frame. Just remove these padding for now. Now I'm going to make sure that this parent container, let me rename it to sign in. We need to make sure that it fits our main frame. So I'm going to increase its width and its height just like this. Okay. Now we need to select the container inside and just set its width to fill container. So it takes up the whole available width of its parents, which is this sign-in frame. But we also need to set some padding for this main frame, for this sign-in frame, right? So I'm going to select it and just set the padding to 32. And I'm sure you remember why we set this to 32. That's because of the margin of our layout grid. Now let's align everything to the center. And just like that, our tablet version is also ready. We just need to select this sign-in frame and just set the constraints to left and right and center. So let's see whether it works or not. Yes, it works perfectly. Awesome. Now let's design the mobile version as well. I'm going to duplicate this one. I'm going to change the layout grid to mobile. And also I'm going to change the frames width to 375. Now let me rename it to sign in mobile. And let's see what we should change here. First of all, we need to select our sign in section and just change the padding here to 16. And also, as you can see, everything is too tight. Since we don't have the luxury of space on the mobile version, we need to just decrease the padding of this container a little bit. So I'm going to select this and I'm just going to decrease this value, the horizontal and the vertical padding to 24. Just like this, as you can see, it looks much better now. Now let's see whether it's responsive or not. I'm going to select this mobile frame and just try to shrink it. Yes, everything is responsive. Lovely. Now let's move on to the next breakpoint, which is the desktop large breakpoint. For that, you know what to do. I'm just going to select this desktop frame, duplicate it, and let me just put it right here. And I'm going to rename it to desktop LG or large. And first, we need to change its layout grid to desktop large, like that. Change its width to 1920. But as you can see, this container is way too big, so we need to just decrease its width. Again, for this frame, we want our container to take up 6 columns. So we just need to hold down the Option or Alt key on our keyboard and just left click and drag like this to decrease its width. Okay. And if we set it to 640, it will precisely take up 6 columns. And now we need to set the constraints to center and center because we don't want it to be fluid anymore. Now let's see how it works. I'm going to shrink it. As you can see, it stays right at the center without changing the layout and vertically as well. Alright guys, our sign-in pages are ready. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I know it was a long process, but it was necessary for you to practice everything you've learned so far. In the next video, I'll let you know what's your next challenge to solve. So I'll see you there. Welcome back. Have you been able to design this responsive table? If yes, congratulations, you are officially a UI designer, because designing this table is very complicated and it requires a deep knowledge of UI design. You need to know how to pick colors, you need to know how to structure the elements, you need to know how to componentize elements, and how to reuse those components. But if you face some issues to solve this challenge, that's alright, it's totally normal. We are gonna do it together so you could find out where your weaknesses are. Alright, first let's analyze this table. Well, this table has three different sections, three main sections. It has a header right at the top, this card header. It has the content frame, and also it has the pagination frame right at the bottom. So we need to create these three main frames, and inside we should put all the other elements. But before we start designing this table, let's see whether there are elements that we could componentize in advance or not. Well, looking at this table, I can quickly realize that there are some elements that have different states, like this checkbox. As you can see, this checkbox has different states. It has a checked state, it has an unchecked state, and it also has an indeterminate state. Usually you see this state when there are multiple states within this column, like checked and unchecked, and we need to design all of them. In addition to these checkboxes, we also have these status badges. We have three different types of status badges. We have the completed, cancelled, and pending badges. So we could design and componentize these elements and later use them in our design. So let's start designing the checkbox and also these status badges. I'm gonna start with the checkbox, but I'm gonna head over to the components page here, and I'm gonna draw a frame. I'm gonna hit A on my keyboard, hold down the Shift key to draw a frame like this, and I'm gonna set its width and height to 20. Let me rename this frame to checkbox, and I'm gonna make it rounded. Well, here you might say that, all right, we could set it to 4. Yes, we can, but I'm gonna make it a little bit more rounded. So if I set it to 8, it would be too much. Instead, I'm going to set it to 6, and I know it means that we are not following our spacing system, which is the 4-point grid system. But if you remember when we talked about the spacing system and how the 4-point grid system works, I also mentioned that there are times that you need to break those rules, and this is one of those times. When you're designing very small elements, you might need to use some values like 6 or 10, which don't exist in your spacing system, and it's totally fine. Almost all designers do that, and it's acceptable. But keep that in mind that for 99.9% of the time, you need to follow your 4-point grid system, okay? So here I'm gonna set this value to 6. Great, it looks nice. And I'm gonna add a gray fill to it. For this, I'm gonna set it to gray 50, like that. And I also want to add a border to it. Basically, we need to add a stroke to it. So let's add a gray 900 to it, just like this, and make sure that it's set to inside, not outside or center. It's very important. It should be set to inside. Okay, what else do we need for this checkbox? Well, first let's design the checked state, okay? So we need to have a tick icon here. I'm gonna go to my components, and from here, I'm gonna go to icons and just look for check. This one looks good. I'm gonna drag it and drop it inside like this. It's way too big, so we need to scale it down. While it's selected, I'm gonna hit K on my keyboard and just scale it down to 16 by 16, just like this, and align it to the center, like that. And as for the color, I'm gonna select it and just change it to gray 900. And basically our checked checkbox is ready. Now I'm just gonna select this checkbox frame and I'm gonna hit Shift and A to add an auto layout to it. It's not necessary, but I prefer to do that because it's easy to keep everything at the center. All right, this is gonna be our first checkbox. Now I'm gonna create a component set to put this checkbox inside. So I'm gonna turn it into a component using this button. Then I'm gonna create a variant, just like this. And for this checkbox, as I said, we need to have 3 different variants. We need to have the checked checkbox, the unchecked checkbox, and the indeterminate checkbox. So now let's design the unchecked checkbox. I'm gonna get rid of this icon inside. We don't need that, just remove it. And also we need to change the color of this border. So I'm gonna select it and just change its color to gray 300, this one. And this is gonna be our unchecked variant. Now I'm gonna duplicate this one again, the default one, duplicate it, select the icon inside, and since it's a component inside another component, we can simply head over to this drop-down menu, and from here we can just swap it with another instance, like minus. I'm just gonna look for minus, there it is, This one looks good. And this is going to be our indeterminate state. And we are basically done. I'm just going to select this second variant and change its background color to white since it's an unchecked variant. Just like this, we have 3 different variants. Now I'm going to select this checkbox component set. And here, I'm just going to rename this property to state. Now let's select this one. Let me just reorganize them. This one is unchecked. This one is checked. And this one is indeterminate. So I'm going to select this first one and just change its value to unchecked. The second one is going to be checked. And the last one is going to be indeterminate. Perfect. Our checkbox component is ready. Now we can move on and create the badge component. What do we need for the badge component? Well, basically we need to have a text layer. So I'm going to create a text layer here and I'm going to type completed like this. And let's change its text style to something small. I'm going to use text XS, semi-bold, and now I'm going to put it inside a frame. I'm going to hit Shift and A on my keyboard to put it inside an auto layout frame, and let's call it badge like this. And this badge should have a fill. So for our badges, we need to use some semantic colors. Semantic colors, as you know, are blue, red, yellow, and green. However, for badges, we can also use gray for the pending state. Okay, so for the completed badge, I'm going to use a green color. Let me select this badge, and from here, I'm going to add a fill to it. Let's see which green looks good. All right, I think this one looks good. So which shade or which tint should I use for the container? Well, for the container, we usually use something very light because we want to make sure that we have a good contrast ratio between the foreground and background. And we want to make sure that our badges are accessible. That's why I set it to 25 like this. Now I'm going to set the text here inside. And I'm going to use another shade of this color palette. I'm going to use 700. And before we move on, while it's selected, let's run the contrast plugin to see whether it passes the contrast ratio or not. Yes, everything looks good. The only thing left is to add a circle right next to it, a dot. So for that, I'm just going to select this badge frame. I'm going to hit A on my keyboard to select the frame tool, hold down the Shift key and draw a frame. Like this. I'm going to set its width and height to 8 and just add a fill to it. I'm going to use 500 this time and just make it completely rounded. All right, cool. Now I'm going to select this badge frame and just align everything to the center. Set the spacing between these two items to 4. Since we have very small elements, it doesn't make sense to set it to 8 or 12 or more. But what about the padding? Well, as for the vertical padding, I'm going to set it to 4 like this. But what about the horizontal padding? Well, I'm going to set the horizontal padding to 12 like this. However, we need to adjust the left padding. But why? Shouldn't we keep everything consistent? Yes, but when you have an icon on one side of your button or your badge, it's better to just decrease the padding on that particular side a little bit to make it look more balanced. So here, I'm just gonna change the left padding. I'm gonna decrease it to 8 instead of 12. Just like this. Now it looks more balanced. And finally, let's make it completely rounded. I'm just gonna increase this value to 13. I'm just gonna rename this frame to dot to keep everything organized. And now it's time to create a component and finally a component set. So let's turn this badge into a component. Add a variant to it, and now I'm going to change this text to cancelled. Now we just need to change the colors. For the cancelled variant, I'm going to use red. So I'm going to change this one, the 700 shade, to red 700, this one. Then the 500 one to red 500, this one. And finally, this one to red 25. Let's check the contrast ratio. I'm sure it passes the test. Like this, everything looks good. Now I'm going to duplicate it once again, and we need to design the pending badge. I'm just going to change the text to pending and change the colors as well. So I'm going to select this variant, and for this badge, I'm going to use the slate color palette, this one. So let's set this one to slate 700, this one to slate 500, and this one to slate 25. And just like this, our badges are also ready. Now we just need to select this component set, change this property name to state, and now I'm going to select this one, set its value to completed, select this one, set its value to cancelled, and finally select this one and set its value to pending. Alright, cool. Now that our components are ready, we can go ahead and start designing the table. So I'm going to head over to the table page, and here we are going to draw a frame. I'm going to hit A on my keyboard to draw a frame just like this. And for now, I'm going to set its width to 1200 and I'm going to set its height to 800 for now. Later we will adjust it, and let's call it table. As I said before, our table is going to have 3 different sections: the card header, the content, and the pagination. So let's start with this card header. For that, we just need to draw a frame just like this. And I'm going to turn my table frame into an auto layout frame. So I'm going to select it, hit Shift and A. And as you can see, it tries to hide the content inside. That's fine. We are going to change that like this. Now I'm going to select this frame inside, and I'm just going to rename it to card header. Let me select the table frame quickly and get rid of these padding. We don't need them. And now I'm going to select this card header and hit Shift and A to add auto layout to it. And now I'm going to set the padding here. I'm going to set the horizontal padding to 24 and the vertical padding to 12. But what about the dimensions of this card header? Well, the horizontal resizing option should be set to fill container, so it should always take up the whole available width of its parent container, which is this table frame, but its vertical one is gonna be hogging the content. So I'm gonna leave it as is, and now I'm gonna start adding a text inside. Hit T, left click to create a text layer, and here I'm gonna type all transactions, but it's way too small. I'm gonna increase its font size. I'm gonna change its text style to text large semi-bold, and also I'm gonna change its color to gray 900. All right, what else do we need? Well, here on the right side, we need to have this vertical more icon. So for that, we just need to go to our components. From here, just look for more. And as you can see, we have this more vertical component. I'm just gonna drag and drop it inside, just like this. 24 by 24 pixels looks good. However, I'm gonna decrease its size to 20 by 20, but you can leave it as 24 by 24 as well. I'm gonna set it to 20 and 20, just like this. And its color is gonna be gray 400. So let me change its color to gray 400, this one. The reason I set it to gray 400 and not gray 900 is because of defining a good visual hierarchy. Okay, now we need to make sure that this icon stays on the right side of this container all the time. You know what to do. We just need to select this text and this icon, put them inside another frame, hit Shift and A, and just rename this frame to content. Align everything to the center and change the spacing mode to space between, and also change the resizing option to fill container, just like this. All right, it looks good, but you know what? I'm just gonna increase the height of this header. To do that, we just need to select this card header and just increase its vertical padding. I'm gonna increase it to 20. I think now it looks much better. All right, what else do we need for this card header? Well, here, as you can see, this card header has a divider, okay, right at the bottom. You see that? We can go ahead and create a divider frame, or we can just add a stroke to it. I prefer the stroke option. So while this card header is selected, I'm gonna add a stroke to it, and I'm gonna choose gray 100. This one. And now our card header is ready, and we can move on to the other sections. Before we move on to the next section, I'm going to select this table frame, and I'm going to make sure that it has a fill. It has a white fill, but we need to use our color styles. Make sure to change it to base white. And now we can create our second section, which is the content frame. So I'm going to draw a frame just like this. I'm going to add auto layout to it, hit Shift and A, and just rename it to content. And then I'm gonna set its horizontal resizing option to fill container. It doesn't need to have any padding, so I'm gonna get rid of these padding. And now let's see what we need inside. Inside this content frame, we need to have a few columns. Well, there are two ways of creating a table. The first way is to just create different columns like this and make them responsive. And later, if you need more columns, you can simply select one of these columns, duplicate it, and your table's width will be changed accordingly. But when you use this way, whenever you want to add one more row to this table, you need to select this last cell of all these columns and duplicate them. The other way is to just create a few rows like this. And in each row, you can have these cells. But the drawback of this way is that you cannot easily add another column to your table. So I personally prefer the first way since it's more flexible and it allows me to add more columns to my table later on. So as I said, inside this frame, I'm going to put multiple columns. Let's start by creating one column, and inside that column, we need to create a few cells. So here, I'm going to hit A on my keyboard and draw a frame inside this content frame. Hit Shift and A to add auto layout to it, and just rename it to column. I'm going to set its width and height to fixed for now. Later, we will change it. And also, I'm going to get rid of these padding. We don't need them. I'm going to set them to 0. Inside this column frame, we need to have one table header cell, and then underneath, we need to have a few other table cells. So let's start by creating the table header cell. For that, I'm going to draw another frame inside, just like this. Hit Shift and A to add auto layout to it, and just rename it to table header cell. I'm going to set its horizontal resizing option to field container, and it also needs to have a fixed height. I'm going to set its height to 44. Now I'm going to set the padding here. I'm going to set the vertical padding to 12 and the horizontal padding to 24, and we will adjust this value later, not now. Now let's add a field to it. For the table header cell, I'm going to use gray 25, and now inside this table header cell, we need to have our checkbox, and also we need to have the text. So let's add a text layer inside. I'm going to hit T on my keyboard and just type company, and I'm going to make it very small. I'm just going to use this text XS, which is the smallest text style within our type scale. Let's choose the semi-bold variant like this, and I'm going to change its color to gray 500. This one. All right, while it's selected, I'm going to set its resizing option to field container, and now we can add the checkbox here. So here I'm going to go to components, and from components, from our local components, we can just drag and drop this checkbox into this frame like this. And now we can easily change the state of this checkbox to indeterminate, and our table header cell is almost ready. The only thing left is to change this value. I'm just going to increase the spacing between these two items to 12 like this. And also we need to add a bottom stroke to this table header cell. Here for this header, we forgot to just add it to the bottom edge. So let me select this content frame and just change it to bottom here as well. I'm going to select it, add a stroke to it. It's going to be gray 100, and it should be added to the bottom edge only. All right, great. Now that our table header cell is ready, let's go ahead and design these cells. For those cells, I'm going to duplicate this table cell. I'm going to remove its fill. It doesn't need to have a fill anymore. I also want to increase its height to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to increase its height to 64. And now here we need to have one more text layer. We need to have the supporting text. But first, I'm going to select this one. I'm going to change its size. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to change it to text small semi-bold like this, and also make it darker. So I'm going to choose gray 900. Then I'm going to duplicate it, hit Ctrl D or Command D. And here I'm going to type test@tesla.com. I'm going to change the weight of this one since it's less important. I'm going to change it to medium. And also I'm going to change its color to gray 500. Now we need to place it right under this text. So we need to select them both, hit Shift and A to put them inside a frame, and let's rename it to text and supporting text like this. Change the direction to vertical, and I'm just going to set this value to 0. Yes, we don't need any margin in between because these are very small text layers. All right, great. Now I'm going to select this table header cell, and just align everything to the center like this. For this one, we also need to align everything to the center. And now let's select this checkbox, maybe checked like this. And as you can see, our second cell is ready. We just need to rename it to table cell. However, here we have a gap between these two cells. To remove that, let's just select this column frame and set this value to 0. And now we can simply select this cell, this table cell, duplicate it a few times like this, and also change the state of these checkboxes. So I'm going to select this one, change it to unchecked. This one looks good. Let's select this one, change it to unchecked again, and these can be checked. All right, great. Our first column is ready. Now it's time to move on to the next column, but we are going to do that in the next lesson. So I'll see you there. Welcome to the second part of the design challenge solution. In this video, we are going to continue working on the table and we are going to design the other columns. So let's dive in. In the previous lesson, we created this first column. Now let's go ahead and design other columns. So here, I'm going to select this first column and I'm going to duplicate it. Now I'm going to select this content frame and I'm just going to remove the gap between these two columns. I'm just going to set it to 0. And here for the second column, I'm going to change the content of our table header cell. Let's change it to order amount. And also we need to get rid of this checkbox. We can either hide it like this, or you could just remove it altogether. I'm going to remove it and let's see what we need here. For the order amount, we just need one text layer. So I'm going to select this second column, hit enter to select the child elements. Now I'm going to hit enter again, and I'm going to select all these checkboxes like this, one by one, and I'm just going to remove them. And also, I'm going to remove this top text of these text and supporting text frame. So I'm going to select them, hit delete, and now here we have one text layer left, and that's exactly what we need. Let me just change the first one to maybe $10,000. And for this one, I'm going to set its resizing option to hog content. Now let me copy it and paste it for the other text layers. This one as well. Just change this value to something else, maybe 5,700, something like this. Change the resizing option to hog content. And I'm going to repeat the same thing. And the reason I'm going to change these values is because I'm going to show you something. And now I'm going to go ahead and align everything to the right. When you have numbers like this, it could be the price point, it could be some other values. It's recommended to align them to the right side because it's much easier for the user to compare the values vertically from top to bottom. Okay, it's a small change, but it makes a huge difference. So I'm going to select this column, hit enter to select the child elements and just align everything to the right. And now we need to select this order amount and just change its resizing option to hog content so that it could align with the other elements here. All right, our second column is also ready. I'm just going to decrease its width a little bit now. Later it will be responsive, but for now, let's make some room for the other columns. Now I'm going to duplicate this column, and now we need to create this delivery date column. So here, I'm just going to type delivery date like this. Let's align everything to the left again. I'm going to select this column, hit enter to select the child elements, and just align everything to the left. And here we need to add a down arrow icon. It allows the user to sort them in an ascending or descending order. So let's add that down arrow icon right next to this one. I'm going to go ahead and just here, I'm going to go to the icons, and from here, I'm going to look for arrow. And let's just look for arrow down. Here we have arrow up, and here we have arrow down. I'm just going to drag and drop it inside. It's too big for this purpose, therefore I'm going to scale it down to 16 by 16 pixels. I'm going to select it, hit K on my keyboard to select the scale tool, and here I'm just going to change its width and height to 16 like this. And as for its color, it should be gray 500. But what about the spacing between these two? Well, here, if I select this table header cell, we set the spacing between items to 12, but here, since we have a very small icon, it's better to decrease this value to 4. Now it makes more sense and it looks Great. Now let's go ahead and change these values quickly. I'm just going to type July 13, 2023, and let's just copy it and paste it for the other text layers. Just like this. I'm not going to change these values again. All right, cool. Now let's move on to the next column, which is the status column. So I'm going to select this column, this third column, and let's just duplicate it. For this column, we don't need this icon, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And let's change this text to status. And here, instead of having this text layer, we need to have our badge, the one that we designed before and componentized. So what I'm going to do is select all these table cells, hold down the shift key and select them one by one, hit enter to select this frame inside this text and supporting text frame and remove them. Hit delete on your keyboard. So I'm going to head over to our components here, and under the components, we'll see this badge component. I'm just going to drag and drop it into this cell. And now I'm just going to copy it, select all these other cells one by one, and hit Ctrl V or Command V. So we've added this badge to all these cells. Now it's time to change these badges. I'm going to select the second one and change it to canceled. You see how easy it is to modify these components when you already componentize them. I'm going to select this fourth one and change it to pending. This one could be completed. This one also could be completed. That's fine. And now it's time to move on to the next column. So let me just select this column and decrease its width for now. This one as well, I'm going to decrease its width to make some room for this column. Well, for this column, I'm going to duplicate this one, the first one. Let's select it, duplicate it. And while it's selected, I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to change its placement. I'm going to move it to the right like this. And also let's select our table frame and just increase its width for now. Great, let's see what we need. Here we need to design this executed by column. So first, let me change this text to executed by, just like this. I also want to get rid of this checkbox. I'm going to remove it. What about these cells? For each cell, we need to have this profile image and also these two text layers, the email and the name. So we can simply replace these checkboxes with these profile images. And the structure of this frame looks good. We just need to adjust their text styles. So let's start by replacing these checkboxes with profile images. Here I'm going to select this checkbox, remove it, and inside this cell, I'm going to draw a frame. I'm going to select the frame tool, hit A to select it, and just draw a 32 by 32 pixel frame. Let's set it to 32 by 32. And this frame should be circular, so I'm going to make it rounded like this. And inside this frame, I'm going to place an image. So first, let me rename it to profile. I'm not going to add an image to it at the moment. Instead, let's add a fill to it for now. Later, we will adjust it. I'm just going to add a gray 300 to it. Now I'm going to add auto layout to it. Hit Shift and A. The reason I add auto layout to it is because later we are going to design these profile placeholders with this text layer inside. So it would be easy to just center align everything. Now I'm going to copy it and just select all these checkboxes on all these cells, just like this. Right click on them and just click on paste to replace. And they will be replaced with these circles. All right, great. The spacing between these items should be 12. It's fine. Now let's go ahead and change these text layers. I'm going to select all these top text layers, all of them. And you know what to do. You just need to run the Content Reel plugin. I'm just going to look for Content Reel. There it is. I'm going to go to the text tab. And from here, I'm just going to click on full name and hit apply all. That's amazing. While they are selected, change the resizing option to hog content. And now I'm going to select all these bottom text layers. And here we need to have random email addresses. So again, I'm going to run this Content Reel plugin, go to the text tab, and just click on this email library, hit apply all, good, and just change the resizing option to hog content. Of course, these email addresses don't match these names. You can go ahead and modify them if you want, but for now, I'm gonna leave it as is. Now let's go ahead and select a few of these profile images, maybe this one as well, this one, and this one, and just add a random image to them. So I'm going to run this Content Reel plugin again, head over to the image tab this time, And from here, you can choose any library you want. I'm gonna click on this one, hit apply all, maybe apply all once again. Yeah, that looks good. And now it's time to create these profile placeholders. So for that, I'm gonna select this one, hit T to select the text tool, left click to add a text layer. It tries to hide the content inside. Don't worry about it, we will fix it. Here I'm gonna type CH, the first letter of the first name and last name. I'm gonna change the background color. I'm gonna change it to gray 50. And now I'm gonna select this text and change its color to gray 900. And finally, we need to select the profile frame and just change its size to a fixed width and fixed height of 32 pixels. Like this, and align everything to the center. All right, good. Now I'm gonna select this one, this profile, copy it, then select this profile here, right click and hit paste to replace. And now we just need to change this text to FM. And this column is also ready. Now we just need to design this last column. So what I'm gonna do is select this last column, duplicate it. And for this last column, we don't need to have any text in the header. So here I'm gonna select this column frame, hit enter to select all the child elements inside. Again, hit enter to select the child elements and just remove everything from these cells. Well, inside these table cells, we need to have two icon buttons. This download button and this trash button. So let's create them. I'm gonna draw a frame here, just like this. And I'm gonna set its width to 40 by 40. You could set it to 44 by 44 as well, but I think 40 by 40 would work. Then I'm gonna turn it into auto layout, hit Shift and A, and here I'm gonna rename it to button. Now inside this button frame, I'm gonna place that icon, that download icon. So let's go to our components. From here, I'm gonna look for download, and we have a few download options. I'm gonna go with this one, cloud download. Let's drag it and drop it inside this button frame, just like this. It's 24 by 24 pixels. It's fine, but I'm gonna scale it down a little bit to 20 by 20 pixels. I'm gonna hit K on my keyboard and just set the width and height to 20. Now I'm gonna change its color to gray 500, like this. And just like that, our first button is ready. Now I'm gonna duplicate it, hit Ctrl or Command D, and I'm just gonna select this icon inside and let's swap its instance with the trash icon. Here I'm gonna look for trash. There it is. Let's click on it, and we don't need to change the color anymore since we set it once. Now we need to select these two buttons and put them inside another auto layout frame because we want to control the spacing between them, right? So I'm gonna put them inside an auto layout frame, hit Shift and A, and here I'm gonna call it buttons. And I'm gonna set the spacing between them to 4. And now we can copy this buttons frame and select all the other cells right here and just paste them inside. All right, cool. All our columns are ready now. Now let's go ahead and select this content frame. And now I'm gonna hit enter to select all the columns inside. And as you can see, all our columns have a fixed width. Let's change it to field container, just like this. Our table will be responsive. However, I'm gonna change something here. You might leave it as is. You might want each column to be fluid like what we have here, but sometimes it makes sense to have some hog content columns or some fixed columns inside a fluid layout, like what I created here. If I just select this table and try to change its dimension, look what we have here. You see this first column has a fluid layout, therefore it tries to take up the whole available width within its parent container, which is this content frame, but all the other columns are trying to hog the content inside. If I select this first column, as you can see, the resizing option is set to fill, but if I select this one, the resizing option is set to hog content. This one as well, this one as well, this one, and this one. You can even set this one to hog, but when you do that, look what happens. You see on the right side, you will have some empty space. So when you have multiple columns, make sure that at least one of your columns has a resizing option of field container to make sure that there is no empty space within your parent container. I'm gonna set it back to field container, and here I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna select all these columns, except the first one, and just change the resizing option to hog content. Just like that, our responsive table is ready. Of course, we need to go ahead and design this bottom section as well, this pagination part, but the main content frame is ready. Now I'm gonna select this table frame, and I'm just gonna get rid of this gap between these two frames. I'm gonna set it to 0. And now let's go ahead and just design this bottom pagination frame. For that, I'm just gonna hit A on my keyboard and just draw a frame, but make sure to put this frame inside your table frame, not inside the content frame. It's so important because here we have one card header frame, one content frame, and we need to have another frame, the pagination frame here. I'm gonna hit Ctrl V or Command V to paste it here and just rename it to pagination. I'm gonna add auto layout to it, hit Shift and A. Now let's set its resizing option to fill container. Now let's set the padding. I'm gonna set the horizontal padding to 24 and the vertical padding to 16. Now I'm gonna hit T on my keyboard, left click to create a text layer inside, and here I'm gonna type page 1 of 10. When you design a table, it's better to limit the number of rows within one page. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for the user to just scan the table quickly. So that's why we create this pagination section. Now let's make it smaller. I'm going to change its text style to text SM medium like this, or maybe text SM semi-bold. Yeah, this one looks better. And the color is gonna be gray 700. So I'm gonna set it to gray 700, this one. And now on the other side here, we need to have these two buttons, the previous and the next buttons. So to create those buttons, you know what to do. You can just hit T on your keyboard, create a text, and just put them inside an auto layout frame. Or you can just use the component that we created for this project. If you remember, we created this button component and we also created this small size button. So why not using that? I'm gonna go to assets, and from here, I'm just gonna look for the button component. There it is. Let's drag and drop an instance of it here. It's placed right there, that's fine. Now I'm gonna change its type to outlined because we need an outline button. And also I'm gonna change its size to small. And finally, I'm just gonna change this text to previous. Great. Now let's duplicate this button, hit Ctrl D or Command D, and just change this text to next. And now our buttons are ready. Let's put them inside another frame because we wanna control the spacing between them. I'm gonna hit Shift and A to put them inside an auto layout frame and just rename it to buttons. Like this, and you know the spacing between our buttons should be 12. And finally, we need to make sure that this buttons frame stays on the right side of this container. To do that, I'm just gonna select this pagination frame, align everything to the center, and change the spacing mode to space between. And just like this, our pagination frame is also ready, and now we are almost done. However, we have a few issues to fix first. As you can see here, we have some empty gap right at the bottom of these last rows. How can we fix that? Well, let's see what's the issue. I'm gonna select this content frame. As you can see, its vertical resizing option is set to hog, so it's fine. Now I'm gonna hit enter to select all the columns. And as you can see, here is the problem. Here we set the vertical resizing option to fixed. It should be hog content, and now that additional gap is gone. Awesome, but what about this bottom empty space? If we select our table frame, our main table frame, here as you can see, we set the resizing options to fixed and fix. This one is fine, but this one should be hog content. Just like that. Alright, as you can see, our table looks very good. I'm gonna make a small change to these badges. I think these dots could be a little bit smaller. So since we componentize them, we can simply head over to the components page. And from here, I'm just gonna select all these dots within these variants. And as you can see, their width and height are 8 and 8. I'm gonna scale them down to 6 and 6. This is one of those exceptions when we don't follow the 4-point grid system. So while they are all selected, hit K to select the scale tool, and here set the width and height to 6 instead of 8. And now it looks much better and it's more balanced because they were too big in my opinion. Yeah, they look very good. What else do we need? First, we need to make this table rounded like what we see here. So while it's selected, I'm gonna increase the corner radius to 8, something like this. And now let's see whether everything works or not. Yeah, everything works perfectly. One more thing I'd like to do is add a stroke to this whole table, because at the moment our table doesn't have a stroke. If I just create a frame here and I try to put it inside, let me just duplicate it and put it inside. As you can see, there is no stroke around it. So to make it stand out, we just need to select this frame and add a stroke to it. I'm gonna add a gray 100 to it, this one. And now if we duplicate it and put it inside another frame, as you can see, it looks beautiful. So now let's give it a try and see whether everything works or not. I'm gonna place it inside this frame and I'm gonna set its constraints to left and right. And let's select this desktop frame and see whether it's responsive or not. Yes, it is. It works perfectly. But I have a question. What if we want to add another column to this table? Well, it's so simple. Since we created this table using columns, you can simply select one of these columns depending on the type you need, duplicate it, hit Ctrl-D or Command-D, and look what happens to this table. Let me move it to the left. I'm gonna duplicate this one. As you can see, another column has been added here and you can go ahead and modify the content. But what if you wanna add another row to this table? Well, in that case, as I said before, you need to select one of these cells and you need to select them on all columns like this. Then hit Ctrl-D or Command-D and the table's height will be adjusted accordingly because we set its vertical resizing option to hog content. And just like that, our responsive table is ready. Welcome back! I hope you could design this responsive dashboard layout. In this video, I'm going to show you how it's done in case you couldn't figure it out. So for this kind of layout, what we need is basically two different frames. One for the sidebar and one for the content on the right side, okay? So what I'm going to do is draw a frame. I'm going to hit A on my keyboard and draw a frame just like this, and I'm just gonna call it sidebar. You can also add auto layout to it if you want. I'm gonna hit Shift and A on my keyboard to add auto layout to it, and let's add a gray color to it, maybe gray 100. And also we need another frame right next to it, which is gonna be our content frame. Now I'm gonna draw another frame right next to it, not inside it, and this one is gonna be called content. And I'm gonna add auto layout to it again, hit Shift and A. And now that we have these two frames, I'm gonna select them both, hit Shift and A to put them inside another frame, and just call it, let's call it dashboard. And we just need to get rid of this gap in between these two frames. I'm gonna set this value to 0. And now if I go ahead and try to change the width, look what happens. As you can see, the frames inside do not respond. So to fix this issue, first, I'm gonna select this sidebar and I'm gonna set its horizontal resizing option to fixed width because we don't want it to change. We want it to maintain its width. So I'm gonna set its width to 320. Usually 320 is a good value for a sidebar on the left. And then I'm gonna select this content frame and set its resizing option to fill container. And now look what happens if I try to resize this dashboard frame. You see that? Here we have a fixed sidebar and the content frame is resizing. And that's exactly what we need. But now let's suppose you wanna add a layout grid to this content frame, right? For that, you need to have another layout grid. We didn't create a layout grid for this kind of layout in our grid system here, but it's quite simple. So what you can do is add the desktop layout grid, and then the only thing you need to change here is the margin of this layout grid. If you remember when we were creating these grids, this one specifically, we set the margin to 150, right? But for the sidebar layout, we don't need to have this 150 pixel margin. Instead, we can set the margin to 32. So that's the only change we need to make here. I'm just gonna detach this layout grid right here and just change its margin to 32. And now you can just copy this content frame, head over to grids and spacing and add it to your layout grid here. But I'm not gonna do that since it doesn't belong to this project. This is just a design challenge. All right, now I'm gonna select our table, the one that we designed before. I'm just gonna copy it and select this content frame and paste it right here. As soon as I do that, look what happens. The content frame tries to hide the content inside, and that's not what I want. So I'm gonna hit Ctrl+0 Command Z. Instead, I'm gonna select this content frame and change its vertical resizing option to fill container. Now if I paste that table here, it doesn't try to hide the content inside. That's exactly what we need. However, we need to modify something here. We need to select our content frame and change its padding. We need to set the horizontal padding to 32 according to our layout grid. And then we need to select this table and change its width, its horizontal resizing option to fill container. And just like that, our dashboard is gonna be responsive. So here I'm just gonna hide this layout grid. And if I select this dashboard and I try to resize it, as you can see, it's fully responsive. You can just simply go ahead and select this content frame and just add more vertical padding to it. I'm gonna set the padding to 32 as well. Just like this, your sidebar layout is ready. In this video, we are going to be talking about how you can improve your UI design skills. Up until now, you've learned all the fundamentals. You've learned how to use Figma, how to design a project from scratch. You've learned how to set up your design system, how to set up your style guide, etc. But obviously, we couldn't cover every single scenario because it's impossible and it requires hundreds of hours of content. Imagine you want to design a project that requires you to design a calendar. Well, we didn't design a calendar in this course, and you may have no idea how to structure a calendar, how to choose colors, which layout should you use, etc. Well, in this video, I'm going to teach you how to teach yourself UI design. It's so cool, isn't it? Let's dive in. Imagine you want to design a website and you want to design the nav bar, okay? And you have no idea how to structure it. You have no idea about the link sizes, what values should you use for your padding, for your margins, etc. Well, in that case, you can simply head over to some real world popular websites out there and just inspect those websites and see how the designer designed that website. For instance, you can simply go to landing folio. We already talked about it. And here, let's suppose you like this website, okay? So you open it up, you hit visit site, and here you want to know how the designer structured this website or what font sizes he or she used or how the spacing works. In that case, you can simply right click here, click on inspect if you're using Chrome, and just inspect this page for different breakpoints. Here I'm going to set the dimension to 1440. Like this, and I'm going to click on this little icon, and now we can start hovering over these elements to see how the designer structured it. So let's start with the nav bar. Well, here if you hover over this, you see it says div content wrapper with the width of 1300. So that's basically the width of the container. And this container has a 40 pixel horizontal padding and an 18 pixel vertical padding. And inside this container, you can see how the designer structured these elements. So here, as you can see, we have one large box or one large frame. And then for this logo, we have another frame, and the same thing applies to these buttons. Then you can move on to the hero section and see how it's structured. You can check the padding, you can check the margin, font sizes, but also you can check these elements in terms of accessibility. As you can see, it shows us the contrast ratio of these colors, which is quite cool. Now I'm going to scroll down. Here you can see that this image is inside another box. Then we have this badge inside another box. These logos, you can easily understand how to structure them and check their sizes. Now I can scroll down. Here again, we have a large container, and inside we have this content frame that includes two boxes, one left box for this content and one for the right content. Then you can scroll down. Here you'll see again, we have a content wrapper. Here we have one large square, inside we have an icon and all these elements. So that's a good way of analyzing other websites in terms of structure, visual hierarchy, element sizes. But what if you want to design a mobile application and you're struggling with the structure and spacing? Well, in that case, you can go to a website called Mobin, It's called mobin.com, and it basically provides you with the screenshots of real-world mobile applications. Here, as you can see, we have different categories. You can simply preview the iOS, Android, and web projects. Let's go to iOS, and here, as you can see, we have different apps. We have Rainbow, we have Apple Home, we have Spotify for podcasters, Figma, etc. So I'm going to scroll down and let's see what we can find here. So I'm going to open up this Apple Fitness. You know what you should do? Just open up any of these screens, maybe this one, okay? Then click on copy to copy the screen to your clipboard. Then go to Figma. Here I created another page called practice and just paste it here, hit Ctrl V or Command V. So here you have a screenshot of that particular app. And then what I want you to do is create a frame, hit A on your keyboard, head over to the phone category, and from here, just choose one of these iPhones. Let's choose this one, iPhone 13 mini, like this. Then I'm gonna put this image inside and we need to scale it down and make sure it fits your frame's width, just like that. Now imagine you wanna know how the designer set up a layout grid for this mobile application. In that case, you can simply add a layout grid to it, okay? I'm gonna change it to columns. Then I'm gonna change the count to 4. I'm going to set the gutter to 16, and then what you can do is increase the margin just like this, okay? And here, if I just zoom in, look what we have. If I just increase it to 24, our layout grid will be perfectly aligned with this button, which means that the margin the designer used for the layout grid of this project was 24. So you can set the gutter to 24 as well, or you can leave it as is. I'm going to set it to 24 as well, and it will be your layout grid, just like this. Now let's say you don't know the spacing between these two elements. In that case, you can simply draw a simple rectangle, just like this, and you can see that the height is set to 32. Okay, now let me just go ahead and look for another screen, a more complicated screen, maybe this one. I'm just going to copy it and just paste it here. Let me put it there. I'm going to duplicate this page and put it inside this one and just set its width to 375. Here, as you can see, the designer used another layout grid. So you can simply select your screen and change the margin again like this. And as you can see, we get a 16 pixel margin, which means that the designer used a 16 pixel margin for this project. I'm going to set the gutter to 16 as well. And just like that, you'll understand the layout grid. Then you can use the rulers in Figma. If you just hit Shift and R, the rulers will be visible, and you can add some rulers to this page to understand the structure of these elements. For example, you can put a ruler right here. I'm going to put a ruler here. Then I'm going to put a ruler here. Let's put one here. Then we need one right here and one right here. So as you can see, now we just created a few boxes. So now you know that the designer created one box for this icon, one large box for these two text layers, or let's say an auto layout frame. What about here? So here we have basically one large box. I'm just going to put another ruler right here and here as well. And inside we also have a few other boxes. I can just put another ruler right here, put one right here. Then I'm going to put one right here and put one somewhere around here because I'm not sure about the width of these text layers, but that's fine. We just want to understand the structure of these elements. I'm going to put one here as well and one here. And now I can just hide this layout grid for a second. And as you can see, using these grids, you can easily understand how to structure such a complex element. So you know that you need to create a large container for this card. Inside, you need to create another large frame like this. And inside that frame, you need to put two frames that include these text layers. And also here, right at the bottom, we need to have another large frame. If I just put another ruler right here and here, you see that we need one more box right here. And that's basically how you can analyze other designers' projects and learn from them. So here, if you're not sure about the padding of this card, you can simply just hover over this line. And as you can see here, we have 16 and 32. So just measure the difference between these two and you'll get the padding, which is 16, and for other elements as well. Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to talk about some tips on color usage. Well, for this project, we used a grayscale color palette because the primary brand color of this company was black. Therefore, I didn't want to use other colors to make it look elegant. However, for most projects, you usually use other colors for your interface, right? Like blue, purple, etc. So now I'm going to give you a few tips on how to prepare your neutral colors for those projects, because you already know how to create your color palette. But imagine you chose one of these colors as your primary color. It doesn't matter which one. Let's say blue, all right, or purple. Okay, so let's choose this purple as our primary color. In that case, you need to create your neutral color palette based on this primary color palette, okay? Although we have these gray color palettes here, it's better not to use them when your primary color is not black. Why? Because they're not gonna be harmonious with your primary color. Then how to fix this issue? I'm gonna go ahead and pick this 500 shade of this neutral color palette. Let me select it. I'm gonna copy it and I'm gonna paste it somewhere else, okay? I'm going to bring it down here. Now I'm going to go ahead and detach this color from its color style. So I'm going to select it, and here I'm going to click on this chain icon to detach it. And here, as you can see, we have this base neutral color. Now I'm going to add another fill to it like this. As you can see, another fill has been added to this color. And using the color picker, I'm going to pick my primary color, which was this one, right? Purple 500. So I'm going to pick this one. And now, as you can see, this purple one has been added to this color swatch. It's placed right here above this neutral gray color. So what we are going to do is mix these two colors basically to make sure that our neutral colors are not boring and they are just not pure gray. So now I'm going to decrease the opacity here down to 30%, just like this. And also what you can do is open up this blend mode here and just change the blend mode to overlay. And just like that, you'll get this neutral color. However, it's not pure gray. So when we start designing a project using our purple primary color and we need to use neutral colors, it's gonna look way more interesting. But we are not done yet. Now that we added this fill on top of this previous fill, we need to duplicate this swatch. I'm gonna duplicate it. And basically we need to remove this top one. And now we have only one fill with a 100% opacity. It's so important. The opacity of our main color swatch should be set to 100%. And now using the eyedropper, I'm gonna pick this color. So we mix those two colors to get this one fill here. Okay, so this is gonna be the color code of your new neutral color. And now that we've got this base color, we can just get rid of this swatch. I'm gonna remove it. I'm gonna copy this hex color code, and I'm gonna head over to the website we already used to create these color palettes. Do you remember that? It was uicolors.app, and here you can paste your color code, and there it is. Here is your neutral color palette. Now you can simply export it like this and just paste it inside Figma, and now you can go ahead and create your color styles out of this color palette. And for your project, you can use this color palette, this color scale, as your neutral color, not this pure gray neutral color. So keep that in mind. It's gonna make a huge difference in terms of the aesthetic of your project. I would also like to mention that they've created a Figma plugin for this website. If you just look for the Tailwind CSS color palette generator, it's this one, the official one. Make sure to use the official one. I'm gonna run it. And here you can basically paste your hex color code, whatever it is, and it will create this color palette for you. And the good thing about this plugin is that you can create color styles using this button. So you don't need to go ahead and manually create your color styles one by one. That's awesome. It's gonna save you so much time. Make sure to give it a try.